Good morning and welcome to this very short time of acquainting ourselves with an important aspect of the war that is raging in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia, the big brother. My viewers would have noticed that there is great sensitivity attached to the use of words in this context. In Russia, it's a crime to call the military action initiated by Putin in Ukraine as war. If you are in Russia and you say that Russia is at war with Ukraine, you could land yourself in jail. So what is happening in Ukraine from the Russian point of view? It is a special military operation, not war. But if you look at the action on the ground, it is full-fledged, brutal, intense war in which entire cities are laid waste and a sizable chunk of the territory occupied by Russian forces is already devastated, and far more devastation is happening. The war, or according to Putin, the special military operation, which was supposed to last only a few days or a few weeks, has now stretched itself over several months and no end is in sight. The focus of our discussion or our thinking together now is not on the details of the military operations, but on this semantic sensitivity. Why is it that it is such a crime to call this huge military campaign, the Russian military campaign in Ukraine, a war, when for all intents and purposes, from every angle of consideration or by any relevant yardstick of measurement, this is an outright war. Now, though this phrase was introduced and it was bandied back and forth for about now a year and a half, not a word has been uttered about the distinction between war and a special military operation. Why this semantic sensitivity? Why should it be a crime to call the so-called military operation a war when for all intents and purposes it is outright brutal war? Isn't it strange that the world over, writers and thinkers offered not a word of explanation in this context, whereas this should have been stated upfront and in elaborate detail especially by independent Ukraine-Russia war watchers. Let me now take you to the root of the matter, because that's what this channel is dedicated to. It is dedicated to promoting an objective and truthful understanding of realities, both at home and abroad, both local and universal. In order to understand the very, very acute and aggravated sensitivities in the description of what's at work or what's in progress in this Russian-Ukraine war, we have to go a long time back in history, and that's rather ironic, isn't it? You have to go to that fountainhead of European wisdom called Socrates. Now, Socrates made a distinction between the wars between Greece and barbarians, Greeks and barbarians on the one hand, and the war between the city-states of Greece. Two kinds or two categories of wars. One is the wars fought between Greece and barbarians. That is, the Greek people considered themselves highly civilized, and therefore, from their point of view, all non-Greeks were barbarians, uncivilized people. But there was also this other problem at home. The city-states, which were independent of each other, the city-states were at war. For example, the wars between Athens and Sparta are very famous, long-standing, fierce military campaigns between Athens and Sparta, the two leading city-states of Greece. So this prompted Socrates to make a distinction between wars between Greece and barbarians, and on the one hand, and wars fought by the constituent city-states of Greece, like Athens and Rome. But wars were not confined to these two city-states. Other states, like Crete, for example, Thebes, they were all at war with each other. Now, according to Socrates, the war between these city-states should never be called a war. They should only be called a discord between friendly states. Please understand this very carefully. Socrates said the war fought between two city-states of Greece should never be called a war. It should only be called a discord between friendly states. And as regards these discords between friendly states, certain conditions, certain restrictions must be observed. First of all, the aim of these wars should never be to turn the citizens of the vanquished city-state into slaves. The outcome of these wars should not be the creation of slaves. Secondly, Socrates said that the land should not be despoiled. These two conditions must be observed very, very scrupulously. Now, whether Putin is observing this or not, as far as turning Ukrainians into slaves, that's out of the question, because slavery is abolished the world over. But with reference to the second condition, a very important consideration, especially from the point of view of the integrity of creation, climate change, etc., which are sensitive issues, but nobody talks about these issues in connection with this war, which pollutes atmosphere and has serious consequences for the global community, but not a word is being said about it. But in relation to this, there are serious issues. Again, they remain unaddressed. Okay, if this background is understood, that has been clearly understood, in order to proceed to the next stage of our inquiry into Putin's sensitivity with regard to the use of words. It's not because Putin is a literary author who is particularly sensitive to the beauty of style and he respects words and language. Like a person like me who has been a student of literature and who is still a student of literature and the English language, I'm particularly sensitive to the use of words. This is what is called semantic sensitivity. Semantics pertains to the meaning of words. That's not Putin's expertise or forte. His expertise is the political acumen and the ability to pursue a grand design in a very systematic and, if necessary, brutal fashion. So, from Putin's point of view, and this is a stated position, which is stated in an article about 3 years ago, from Putin's perspective, all the former parts, all the constituent parts of the former USSR, and before that the Russian Empire, the great Russian Empire, belong together. they have really no right to exist independently. Russia being the largest, strongest part of this former empire and the subsequent USSR, it has an inherent right to dominate over others. So Putin accepted as his life mission to regain the lost glory of this great empire. I remember landing in Moscow immediately after the disintegration of the former USSR. And I could sense in Moscow airport, even among the shopkeepers there, the sense of anger and frustration that the Russians experienced when a great superpower ceased to be one overnight, and there was great panic everywhere. And you won't believe this. I wanted to buy a sandwich for myself, a sandwich and a cup of coffee. I had to walk here, there, and everywhere in that huge airport. I found that every shelf was empty, and there was anger on the face of the people who were manning these stores and cafeterias, etc. So that I was a personal witness to that. Now, from that, Putin has taken at least Russia to a new height. So obviously he has ambition to reunite what according to him are lost territories of the Russian Empire. And therefore, from his point of view, this is not a war between two nations, but it's a war between two parts of the same geopolitical entity. It is analogous to, or it's similar to, the war between two city-states in ancient Greece, which, according to Socrates, should not be called war, but only a discord between friendly states. They are part of the same larger political entity called Greece. Likewise, in Putin's imagination, Ukraine has no right to independent existence. This has to be clearly understood if you want to understand the very great importance attached to the war in Ukraine. Putin ardently believes that Ukraine has no right to independent existence. If at all Ukraine remains as a country, it can only function, or it will be only allowed to function as a satellite of Russia, to be controlled and directed by Putin or his successors after his demise, and therefore, for all practical purposes, de facto an extension of the Russian Empire. This is actually the unstated intention of this war, which therefore must be called a special military operation. He, of course, at the outbreak of this war, certain objectives were stated, like demilitarizing Ukraine, denazifying Ukraine, as though Ukraine is under Nazi control, which is a figment of Putin's imagination. Volodymyr Zelensky, who is the president of Ukraine, is a Jew. How can he be a Nazi agent? One does not understand. But in political rhetoric, it is not truth that matters. It is some kind of a hypothesis which is then inflicted on the people, and everybody is obliged to believe it. If you don't swallow this, then you are an enemy of the state and you will land yourself straight in the prison. And that's the reality in Russia, as you know. And that will be the reality in any country which is at war with another country. So I thought I should offer this much clarity to my viewers who would not get this insight from, I'm sure, from any other source they can imagine. And therefore, the uniqueness of our channel is that privileged information, privileged insights are offered to the members who may not receive it, and in many cases are sure not to receive it from other sources, especially from media sources. So thank you very much for being part of this quest for clarity in the understanding of powerful realities, the realities that surround us, where we need to understand them clearly in order to make sense of them. Then making sense of these events is also part of our commitment to make sense of life. With that, I close and offer you and wish you a very meaningful day ahead. Thank you.